On this episode of Scammer Stories, a woman is shocked to find out that her mother was actually living without heat, air, or running water, and what she later learned was due to a romance scam. Now, this is a tough one, so grab the tissues. We're calling this daughter Betty. Here's Betty's story.
So I'm from Billings, Montana. My mother and father met while they were there, and this was in the late 1960s. And they were business owners, and my father worked in mainly construction as a foreman. He was a union hand, and my mother was a registered respiratory therapist, of which she retired in that field. And I followed suit thereafter. I had a brother. He was killed in 1977 in an auto pedestrian accident, and that was really hard on that marriage. So my mother and father wound up divorcing within a couple of years, although my dad did tag along to the state of Wyoming. My mom's originally from Wyoming. She's from Jackson Hole, a beautiful area where you could go on almost every trail. You could camp at that time. But of course, a lot of real estate has changed there. She wound up residing in a little town called Diamondville, Wyoming. It's kind of Kemmerer, Frontier, and Diamondville. There are all these small mining towns that have just been there for, I think just under a couple of centuries and pretty well established that way. She had a good job there until she retired, and I wound up leaving that area just as soon as I could. I wound up graduating from high school in that small town of Kemmerer, and then I wound up going into the military, and my life took off in another direction, but I was always extremely close to my mom.
So when did this whole nightmare begin then, and how did it get started?
Okay, I was teaching college. I'm also a respiratory therapist, but I did wind up teaching in medical career college for a number of years, and was standing up in front of my class about ready to get them to go on break. And I had received a text message from a cousin of mine that I needed to go to visit my mother in the state of Wyoming ASAP. I was in New Mexico at this time. And when I inquired more, she had told me that my mother was living without utilities in her home and that she was borrowing water from her sister who lived right down the street from her.
Now, what's the weather like there at this time?
This time right now, it's pretty decent. It can anywhere from say 80s to the high 90s. It's rare that it gets up to 100 degrees, but it can definitely do that, especially in a mobile home type environment where she lived. But in the wintertime, absolutely brutal cold. So subpar temperatures, for that region, especially within the last year.
By the time she heard about the situation, the weather was pretty cold, but not yet brutal. Still, not a situation anyone would want to find their elderly mother living in. So the first thing she did was pick up the phone.
I just checked in with her. First of all, I was so shocked and I was so scared. I just couldn't understand what had happened. My mother explained to me, she says, I'm fine. It's not a big deal. And I was like, Mom, what do you mean it's not a big deal? In a text message that my cousin had sent to me, she had explained that my mom was involved in a romance scam. And she seemed to have all of this information, but nobody bothered to tell me. And what my cousin had explained is she said, your mom is so secretive and she's so worried that you're going to find out and judge her. She didn't want any of us to tell you, but it's just getting so bad. We're worried about her and we think you need to intervene. So, of course, I took off and I did intervene. I confiscated her telephone. I had a good conversation with her and I told her, Mom, this is not okay. This is not okay. This is a bad person. You're here living out without utilities, and whomever you're speaking to is obtaining all of this money from you. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And so she had denied that she'd been giving any money to anyone.
Mm-hmm. They always lie at first, yeah.
And she said, this has been my choice to go without utilities. She says, I'm talking to the water company right now. Water in that area is really substandard. It's not good. It smells like fish scales. It's got a lot of earthiness to it. It isn't really clean. It's always been part of some type of joint powers, kind of weird city connection. But it always seems like there was like a third party that came in and built this water structure. And then it's absolutely disgusting. It smells just like the Hams Fork River that runs through that whole valley. And anyways, they charge basic rate is $100 for that very terrible water. And so I could understand my mom's point, but it didn't explain why she didn't have any of her lights on at that time.
The first thing to do was get the water and electric restored. That was just the beginning.
I got it stopped, and I got her to work on getting all of her power and her utilities back on. And I just went and filed a police report and tried to put fear of God in her, that this was a bad man. He was dangerous. Do not ever talk to him again. In fact, he did call, but the gentleman the man, not the gentleman, the man that I spoke to on the phone, on her phone, did not sound Nigerian at that time. He sounded like an average Caucasian person would, a man, maybe a big beefy guy. But I have found out that they can also, some of them have gone to school in other parts of the world, and so they can mimic different accents and so forth. But I had thought I had arrested it at that time. And for a very short amount of time, she came to the state of New Mexico and she stayed with me. And we were able to bond a little bit until she just didn't want to be here anymore. She thought it was too much traffic. And of course, it is kind of scary traffic out here, too many people. And so she wanted to go back to Wyoming. So she did wind up going back. But unbeknownst to me and most people in our family, we had no idea that she just picked up with this person, where she had left off with him. Or maybe different people that worked in that office. I always had a suspicion that it was a ton of them in one office doing this, or sitting around a dinner table in a home or something, because it just seemed like they were constant.
So the scam took a different direction here, a darker direction. It wasn't just the utilities she lost. Tell us what happened next.
She wound up, and what I'm finding out now, she wound up supposedly married to him. He had called her his wife. I do not see any evidence out there that my mom was married to this person. But interestingly enough, he started getting her into coin flip, cryptocurrency, becoming an investor. And the way I know that now is because I have seized all of the phones and I can see the text messages and all of the different barcode, all of that information that would indicate that there's some type of transaction that was happening there.
Okay, and so you think she was muling?
I think that there is a very strong possibility, without her really having real full knowledge of what that was. Yes, my mom was somebody who was just a very, very good person. She was a good citizen. But, after his influence for the last 7 years, she became somebody who only trusted maybe God-fearing people or people who were Christians or had like-mindedness like she did, and definitely did not respect government, any type of municipal agencies or police officers after this. And of course, I understand now why she was like that, because, well, he coached her to be like that. He advised her to be like that. He used a lot of religiosity with my mother. And it sounded biblical sometimes, but he also was preaching to her, I think, on his own terms, in his own context of what the Lord Jesus Christ's teachings are. And I was able to pick that up in conversations that we would have on a weekly basis throughout this, especially this last maybe 2 years.
Here's the one simple thing that Betty did right, in my opinion, that I didn't do. I got fed up, and the calls to my mother were fewer and fewer, but not Betty.
I was pretty close to her. I talked to her almost every day, if not every other day, with the exception up to the point where she passed away. I had lost my phone on a road when I was walking downtown Albuquerque with a friend to a restaurant. It fell out of my purse. I didn't see it. I just couldn't reclaim it again. Somebody had turned it off and had Finder on it. But that was also my main way of keeping in contact with my mother. Subsequently, she also lost her phone at the same time. So we were both in the process of getting our phones when I got word from her best friend that my mother wasn't feeling well on the 9th of May, 8th, I believe. And so she texted my mom, and I guess my mom did respond. My mom also then had a text that got relayed to me kind of later when my phone was accessible, my new phone. And then I found out that she no longer was answering her door. So the friend, who's an elderly lady herself, and she's quite frail, she went and called the police department and had them respond. And they went into the house and they found my mom. Sorry. Yeah. They found her unresponsive in the hallway of the mobile home, and she never did really recover. They took her to the hospital when they were trying to get a hold of me, and before I could talk to them, they had already had her intubated because they had done a round of CPR on her. And I just was so devastated because it's just not something that I would ever imagine would have happened to her, because I had no idea that she was still being scammed. So
now on top of mourning your mother's loss, you got to deal with the anger. That's what I went through, the same thing.
I'm so angry.
Mm-hmm. At this point, I'm crying. You're probably crying. This is horrible. If you're a scam victim and can still tell me it doesn't affect anyone in the family but you, it's your money, then you'll have to live with that later on. When your loving children are trying to help and you refuse and get ugly about it, your relationship will forever be changed. Trust me. Stop the online crap. Grab your loved ones, look them in the eye, tell them you love them, and for once, admit you have a problem and figure out how to move on together as a team.
I'm so angry, but my faith has told me that the only way that we can get redemption is to forgive. You don't have to forget. You don't have to accept anything about them into your life, but you do have to forgive them so that the Lord can do, what the Lord needs to do about that situation. And so that's what I'm doing in my life, because to carry the pain is just too much.
Now, you say that the scammer eventually led to her death. Can you talk about what happened there?
Yes. So bizarre. My mom had talked to me about, she was planning with a close group of friends to open up a healing center for Christians in the surrounding Kemmer area. And I knew what this area she was talking about. It's this dilapidated kind of compound, old bar supper club that's about 15 miles out of Kemmer, and just absolutely ridiculous. But I'd listen to her. There were times I had to really just sit back and just let Mom talk about her ideas.
I did the same thing. Last trip my mother took to Oklahoma, where I live, we went to look at houses for her and her scammer.
I needed to have her in my life. I wanted to hold her close so I could protect her. I always had that sense of urgency that I needed to do that for her. So she had discussed that this was going to be a healing center. It was all going to be funded by BMO Bank, of all things, because whoever is running BMO is somehow, linked to the Lord. And of course, I knew this was out there, but at the same time, my mom was talking to me. And you have to understand, my mom in the last 2 years of her life is the happiest I have ever heard her in her entire life. Just completely in love with God, just blissful and very positive and very reassuring that all things are taken care of. She's taking care of herself. No need to worry about her. And she even had very helpful advice for me. And I did grow very, very close to her through talking about Christ. And I'm just grateful that I had that time with her. But I can also see, though, some of the warped points that she had. And one of those is that he had talked her into drinking. And I know this now. I didn't realize it then. She had told me that she was drinking a small cup of coffee in the middle of the night with a tablespoonful of sugar in it. Mind you, she was 76 years old. And the last I had spoken to her, she was an untreated diabetic that was on metformin, and she gave that up. She just didn't take it anymore. So as far as I know, for 7 years, my mom was ingesting sugar and sitting up late at night talking to this person on the phone or conducting business at night.
Now, did he want her to do that to kind of keep her delirious, or how did what's up with the coffee and sugar?
Well, I'm a medical person myself, and what I'm thinking now is, yes, I had believed that this person either had taken care of elderly people, or maybe he has a spouse that does that, because it seemed like a lot of things were fixated on keeping my mom up at night, keeping her busy with prayers and taking confessions from lost souls. I heard that from my mother a time or two. Working diligently with other clairvoyants that were going to get the United States ready for the coming of Christ, that there were clairvoyants that were all part of his entourage of people that were going to usher him in here and, do what needed to be done to get as many people on board as possible before that day comes. And I think he kept her up at night as much as he could until he completely had her under his control. And yes, I do think that he told her that she needed to drink sugar because that was the important angel part of her, an important clairvoyant part of her, to give her the visions that she needed and that she would be completely safe. And I think my mom adhered to it. And I'm convinced now that that's what that all was all about.
So what was her official cause of death then?
She died of a diabetic ketoacidosis, pancreatitis, and natural causes due to age.
Now, why do you think the scammer wanted her ill?
Towards the end of all of this, when I went home to deal with my mother's death, the neighbor across the street, there were always neighbors that were pretty close to her and always kind of watching her and giving her a hand when she needed. There were people that were bringing food to her. The senior citizens was bringing food to her. I had even gotten word that the Church of Latter-day Saints, that is pretty prominent in that community, was even helping my mom out at times. And I did not know any of this. Nobody ever bothered to contact me, but I just got the sense that for at least a few of them, I might have been estranged, is what they had heard, which that isn't the case at all. My mother and I were very, very close. My mother was just keeping this information from me to protect me. But what I had realized is that the neighbor across the street had told me that my mom was waiting for her husband to show up for Christmas this year. And he didn't. And from my understanding, that happened to my mom quite a bit. But my mom put her foot down, and that was the last that her friend had ever heard about this man. So my thoughts are, as my mom probably had realized she gotten herself into a predicament. And maybe that's when she realized it was a scam. And perhaps she was backpedaling, and that upset him, and he attacked her.
They get angry. Yes. Okay. I didn't think about that.
So when I was doing all of these proceedings, and I got a hold of her phone, I went right down the list of all these new names that she had on there. And one that stuck out to me was a capital G, capital G. Another one was safe as being the contact. And then a capital G, little g. And my understanding is those GG signs could be like some type of acronym for Nigerians that are over there doing crypto-based scamming. So what I did is I went right down the list and I was just, hello. And sure enough, the contact for G, capital G, he said, who is this? And I said, I pretended it was my mother. I wanted to see who this was. I texted, it's Shirley. And he then said, hello, my wife. He texted. And from there, he called. But when he did call, he called me in the state of Idaho. I had a friend who was living in the state of Idaho, and I would run over there and spend the night and get caught up on some investigating, and then go back to the town of Cameron Diamondville. And so I actually got him on the phone, and I pretended to be my mom, and I contacted the Pocatello Police Department and filed a complaint because that's where I had received the call, and I considered it criminal activity.
Now, did he believe you that you were your mother? How'd the conversation go?
Here it goes. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Where did you get your number? Because my phone went out. I don't feel good. What phone are you using now? I got a new phone. Did you get my number? No, I didn't get your number because somebody tried to steal my phone from me, so I changed my number too.
It's just ridiculous, right? So I have 5 recordings because when I talked to the detectives in the state of Idaho, he said, if you can get him how to run you through how he's doing his little coinage thing, he said that would be a good idea. So I actually pretended I was my mother, and I actually went to a gas station that had a Bitcoin machine, and I tried to get him to walk me through the process. And then I think it was at that time he realized that it wasn't my mother. It was in fact me. And he did confront me, not in that call, but another call that he said, I know it's you. I've known you for 7 years.
I've known you for 7 years.
Yeah. It was just the creepiest thing. He said, oh, I knew it was you. I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, I know this isn't Shirley. This is her daughter. I've known you for 7 years. So it's just devastating. And I don't know if you could hear him on there,
I
but
could, yeah.
just lying. And it's just, my goodness. I mean, whatever tactic he was using on my mother, she was just convinced he was a family member, I'm guessing. Sounds like he comes from a third world type of
Yeah.
situation.
So what did police end up doing?
Nothing. Everybody is saying they just don't really have the jurisdiction. And the common theme is that, we don't really have the manpower. I hate to say this because I always get the feeling that there's some type of opportunistic criminal mind out there that listens to podcasts and are like, oh, so yeah, just the same thing that the Diamondville PD had told me, Actually, Diamondville PD was a little bit different. They actually said that my mom had the absolute right to give her money to whomever she wanted to. And I remember having this conversation. I said, well, even if it's a criminal act and she might be money muling, just dead silence after that. Dead silence. And so I think this was something that they just didn't have a handle of.
It's theft by deception. And a lot of people think, oh, you just gave your money away. There is no crime. Yes, there is a crime. And that's what a lot of law enforcement agencies are getting educated on this now.
2 years ago, I had contacted everybody that I could that would listen to me. And of course, they listened to me, but every agency told me the same thing. I'm so sorry. There's nothing we can do. You're going to have to go through the appropriate channels through the FBI website. Well, I only got contacted one time, and apparently I wasn't a business. And at that time, it just wasn't that important to them. I didn't have enough pertinent information. But that's the trouble, too. I imagined if I was 60 years old, a retiree that was going through this, or a 70-year-old person, and I was trying to get on that actual website and file anything to get support and help from an FBI agent, there's just no way. I don't think the average person of that age level, they wouldn't be able to navigate it. It's almost next to impossible.
Yeah, I went on there to try and report some of my mom's information. There's a lot of stuff on there that they want. I didn't get very far because I didn't have close to half the information I needed.
But even more devastating is a lot of these agencies, if you're not a business and there isn't any insurance that's behind to help pay for their proceedings or their platforms, they're just basically not able to do it, and they won't do it. And that's really a problem. I had called Homeland Security 2 or 3 years ago. Actually, I had somebody on the phone, and I explained to him, I said, guys, this is almost like a terrorist attack. Nobody's paying attention to it. If anything, this is coming from another country. It's going through Neutral Tandem Intelliquent out of Canada, which is kind of like the network supplier for a lot of phones that, do the intercontinental exchange, and coming right into the United States of America, and they get to spoof their number. They do everything. And they're using tactics to take money from elderly people or poor, lonely people that, probably really don't have the means to stick up for themselves. And they just, crickets in the background. They were just not interested and didn't want to hear it because I wasn't any kind of official. But I told him, I said, I'm really scared for my mom. I'm just so scared that this is going to completely devastate her. And it did. It wound up taking my mom's life indirectly, but she died.
I want to thank Betty for sharing her story. That wasn't easy at all, as you heard. So there's a resource that I don't talk about enough here on the podcast. Go to advocatingforyou.com. It's the website of the organization I'm a part of called Advocating Against Romance Scammers, or ARS for short. There's all kinds of information there, everything from how to spot a romance scam to how to anonymously fill out a card that we're sending to lawmakers in Washington, D.C., so they can see for themselves how much this impacts their constituents. I'll put the link to that website in the show notes. I'm headed to Washington, D.C. actually soon with the ARS board. Stay tuned for more on the outcome of that. On another note, summer is a tough time for podcasters. People are out on the lake, in the backyard with their children. I get it. So if you want to do something for me, just share the episodes on social media. That's a huge help. Until next time, Scammer Warriors.